My name's Gordon Young. It's the 3rd of February 2026, and it's week two of the PhD experience. I'm trying to be super regular and reliable on these things, so far so good. Right. It's week two, which means it's into commencement presentation territory. I've got a pretty good supervisory panel. Thanks very much to my primary supervisor, Matteo. Thanks very much. He's done an excellent job of assembling a group of people that have an interest in this space, and therefore my job is to present to them who I am, what we're talking about, what the PhD is about, what my objectives for the PhD are about, and what my proposed methodology for that PhD is. Now, this is all very proposition, right? So it's not definitive to say the very least. Basically, what we're doing here is I'm putting out where I'd like to go with all of this based on my understanding of the space, and they will give me insights and suggestions and criticism. What they already know, what's already in the place. As you may or may not know, PhDs need to be unique. The whole point is to put something out into the world or develop research that doesn't exist. So to do that, I need to know what's already there. And they know this, and I do not. As much as I've done quite a bit of reading in the recent times, there's a lot of material on this, as you can imagine. Less so on the artificial intelligence, but we'll get there. And yes, they will then give me ideas and I will refine down what I propose to do. That's going to be a process of about 6 months, realistically, back and forward, and lots of reading. So, part of that big question from last time was the AI aspect of all of this work. And I can now definitively say, after meeting with the supervisor, Matteo, and having a good conversation about that, we're sticking with that. There's two reasons for this, as I expressed some concerns last time. The two reasons we're going to keep this: one, it's inevitable. The technology is not going away. This is not Bitcoin. This isn't the blockchain. This isn't NFTs or a myriad of the other ideas that sort of sprung up, burst, and disappeared. Well, there's definitely a bubble on AI, but this is probably more akin to the dot-com bubble where the startups and the various corporations might burst and fade away, but the concept is here to stay, right? And this, I say that with some confidence, considering that, well, from personal experience, the New South Wales government, where I was previously working, had integrated Copilot everywhere, everywhere. Once it's that deeply embedded, kind of like social media, in my estimation, it's going to stick one way or the other. So it is inevitable. Moreover, it's inevitable because it's already in use by extremist groups. To that end, one of my primary readings from this week, thanks again to Matteo for the reference, is the Hedaya paper, Artificial Intelligence for Counter-Extremism. Links down in the description. Have a look at that. It's very good reading. And they noted several critical things when it comes to artificial intelligence in this space. First and foremost, extremist groups are using AI in a very experimental way thus far, much like everyone else. But it is well underway. Apparently, the most common use is to drive a rhetoric propaganda effectively. But interestingly, the creation of deep fakes. And this is interesting to me because I heard a story from a friend recently where one of their friends, a friend of a friend, had got in touch with them with a video of Muslims in New York protesting dogs and saying that dogs should not be allowed in New York because they are haram. Video was AI slop. But if you don't know that and you don't know what to look for, or if you're predisposed to perhaps believe that, it can nonetheless be effective propaganda. Apparently, the translational properties, which is again something I do have some personal experience with, of AI is very, very effective, and that allows for more widespread propaganda because then even if you don't speak the language, you can still develop reasonably effective propaganda in that language. So that's interesting. Point being, no, it is inevitable because it is already underway. Also interesting points from that paper was that in general, it was sort of an overall review of where we're at with AI, particularly in this context. There's no accountability mechanisms. Counteraction of extremist groups with AI, particularly in a terrorist setting, is also experimental at this stage, but it's running into troubles because we haven't really seen. Okay, if you're familiar with the idea of the tech literacy curve, early adopters early on, and then it goes into the mainstream, and then you get resistant people on the far side of it. By my estimation, we're just coming out of that early adopter phase and we're just starting to hump over into the mainstream. That is a critical period because now, where you didn't before necessarily need any sort of confidence as to how the technology works and what can be expected of it, now you do, because now everyone's going to be using it. And kind of like social media, we've gone from experimental space where people are messing around and trying new things to if it's going to be mainstream, it better work properly, which is exactly where the cryptocurrency thing sort of fell sideways. So, another conversation for another day. There's no accountability mechanisms, is the point. Right now, there is no way to hold the owners of an AI program or the AI program itself, obviously, accountable for error or for failure or anything of the sort, as we're seeing some examples of quite recently. So that in turn is a major problem. Yes, I'm aware capitalism, yes, they don't care if they can make a profit off it. However, the lack of accountability right as we're going into that mainstreaming means that there's no trust. And we're already starting to see those narratives develop, right? Why would you trust the product? There's no reason to. It's either blind trust, hope, or distrust is your options at this point. Yeah, and I know a lot of people, myself included up until quite recently, who are avoiding AI like the plague simply on that basis. I don't know how this works. I don't trust the company that owns it or uses it. I don't know what their intentions are for the use of the data that they gather from it. Probably malicious, a little bit of a cynic, and therefore I'm not going to use it. Also, I don't have to yet because it hasn't become mainstreamed. It's getting there, but it hasn't. So this in turn was added to because there's not a lot of data-driven research about the use of AI thus far. A lot of it is speculative, which is to say risk-based. This could happen with AI in this context. I've contributed to it myself with the police, did some work in that space. So all of this brings us back to the question, the second reason we're keeping AI in this, and that is opportunity. We are on the cusp of it becoming mainstreamed. Yeah, for everyone, and for good or for ill. It's just a tool at the end of the day, right? But with no guardrails on it, it can be used for practically anything. One of the more disturbing uses I've heard of, well, one of the many disturbing uses I've heard of it recently, apparently it's quite adept at developing new viral designs for biological weapons and the like. Apparently, this is a legitimate concern in the security community. Functions as a pseudo lab assistant, as the Hedaya paper put it. Or, as we're seeing on a more, maybe not as quite an existential level, but certainly in terms of a high volume of high level damage, is the creation of AI fakes or nudes of public figures, or not even public figures, just people, as we've seen with Grok and Elon Musk and Twitter, or X or whatever he's calling it this. Regardless, right? It's open to use. So if we want to improve it, and this goes from a commercial perspective as much as anything else, if you want people to use this tool, you need to build legitimacy and therefore trust, right? And that depends on accountability. So it has occurred to me this week off the back of this paper that the same ethical framework I'm putting together that would determine when it is ethically permissible, very high bar here, to use AI or to use any other sort of system to limit the spread of an idea in online platforms, specifically Nazis, Islamic radicals and extremists, sorry, and sovereign citizens being our test cases. That same framework can also function in the opposite direction, right? You set a high bar for when you can regulate an idea using these tools. But by consequence, we've also set a whole enormous set of circumstances that don't fit into those criteria under which you cannot regulate an idea. Yeah? So if it doesn't fit in, it's out. Combine that, publish that with a good rationale and some evidence to support it, which is the whole objective of this PhD. Combine that with some basic transparency, put it out there. This is how we do it, and this is why we do it. Here's the data to support it. And now you've got a basis to build actual legitimacy for its use because there's clear and tested criteria for when we do use it and therefore when we do not. That in turn allows for regulatory responses and or civil lawsuits if a company does breach those guidelines. So this is all very speculative at this point, but we've suddenly found another component to this potential research, which I'm feeling very good about. So, as I said before, my major concern here is regulatory overreach. But by establishing a standard by which you may limit an idea, we also establish a basis upon which you must not or you cannot. So I'm feeling pretty good about this right now. In terms of the presentation itself, we've got several elements to the methodology. The first one being the ethical framework. So this is going to be a combination of a consequentialist or utilitarian framework and a deontological input and output. I'll probably cover that in the next presentation. Maybe I'll throw the presentation up just for, in the next video, I'll throw the presentation up on the screen for fun. The other element is the technical analysis. How do these tools work? And that includes the AI itself. And then there's the question of stakeholder analysis. We need to understand how the groups are going to respond to any attempt to regulate them. And not necessarily the ideology itself. The ideologies aren't that complex, but I mean, there's variations, but that's not really the point. The point is that for these vile groups, which are easy targets for this sort of thing, how are they likely to respond in a tactical fashion? Another article I've read recently was an academic analysis of the Bolt case way back in the early 2000s, where he got sued. Oh, no, I think it was sued. Anyway, I got to verify that. For racial discrimination, some of the grandees among us may remember. Um, and it's perhaps the major takeaway from that is that hate speech legislation in an attempt to legislate and regulate hate speech is often used as propaganda for hate speech causes. The classic being, I have been silenced. They're taking away my freedom of speech, he screamed from the front page of a newspaper and several television and radio shows over the course of 6 months. You know, the standard conservative nonsense. So that also needs to be integrated into the thinking here. For example, the simple point is that if they can move around any attempt to regulate the idea, then it's not effective, and therefore, as a consequentialist myself, it didn't work. There you go. End of conversation, right? It has to work. Otherwise, there's no point. The theory can be as sound as you like. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Hence the data-driven approach here. And finally, the question of scope. This is, again, I'll elaborate on this later on, but there's a lot of, this is going to be a major risk with this research. It could get out of scope so fast. And if I start losing control of the scope of this research, the next thing you know, it's just going to take 40 years of my life and I'll die not having completed it, which is obviously something I would rather avoid. So that is the state of play in week 2. Much more reading to do, much more refining to do to the presentation. I think we're getting pretty close with it though. I might be in a position to put that up here. Probably not before I take it to the my panelist supervisory panel, but maybe afterwards. But I'll check with them. But yeah, off to a good start. Now, important point. People have asked, are you open to criticism and contribution in the comments? Absolutely. It's part of the motivation of doing this. If you have thoughts, if there's something I should read, or if you think I'm wrong, please say so, either in LinkedIn or on this YouTube video or wherever I posted this. Yeah, I need criticism and I need input. I'm one person, and life has taught me anything that it's very easy to get lost in one's perspective. So throw it at me. Absolutely. Very keen. And if you'd like to catch up for an academic coffee and a chat, I am very open to that too. Thanks. See you next week.